Hi everyone, welcome to this video on Microsoft Azure and open licensing, which is basically Microsoft Azure for small medium enterprises. My name is Aidan Finn. I'm the technical sales lead with a distributor in Ireland called Micro Warehouse. And in this session what I want to do is talk about how you can use Microsoft's infrastructure as a services offering in Microsoft Azure in a small medium enterprise scenario through open licensing. So, I'm Aidan Finn, and I've been working in IT since '96. I'm an MVP with the Hyper-V expertise. So I'm one of about 70 odd people around the world with that expertise. My background is in Windows Server and desktop management and deployment, system center and management and virtualization, and in IT infrastructure in general. And in the last year or plus, I've been, building up my skills in Azure IaaS. And learning how I can use it in hybrid cloud and cloud-only deployments and scenarios. I tweet as @Joe_Elway, and I blog on aidanfinn.com, and I'm the contributing virtualization editor in the Microsoft space for Petri IT Knowledge Base on Petri.com. And myself and some of my colleagues in the past have written a few different books over the years. Micro Warehouse is an Irish distributor that's based in West Dublin, and some of the big products that we distribute come from companies like Microsoft and Apple and Toshiba. In the Microsoft space, we deal with open licensing, which means we sell licensing for small medium enterprises to resellers, and then they sell them on to those small medium enterprise customers. We deal with the traditional stuff like Open, OV, and OVS licensing for things like Windows Server and Exchange, but we also work with cloud licensing through Open, such as Office 365, CRM Online, EMS, and Azure. Some of the other products that we deal with are like storage solutions from DataOn, which allows you to deploy storage spaces and scale out file servers using their JBODs and cluster-in-a-box units. 5.9 Software, which gives us Hyper-V solutions for management and security, and Binary Tree, which gives us solutions for migrating Exchange and Office 365. Micro Warehouse is a value-added distributor, so we don't just sell licensing and product, but we also, provide services around that. It might be consulting, it could be advisory, but we also deliver a lot of training, and this video is an example of that. So in this session, what I want to do is talk about Azure. A lot of people have heard about it, but they don't really know what it is. So I want to talk about Azure. I'll talk about its role in business, how it can offer hybrid solutions for companies and cloud-only solutions, and what some of those solutions may be. So, what is Azure? Well, Azure is Microsoft's public cloud. Public cloud is a shared multi-tenant infrastructure that's typically run by a hosting company and is offering services to anybody who wants to use them. One of the key traits of a cloud is that it's self-service, which means you don't need to talk to Microsoft IT to get something done. You log into a portal and you do it for yourself, or a partner will do it for you. Microsoft Azure is one of the big three clouds. There are only three companies that operate at cloud scale. There's Microsoft Azure, there is Amazon Web Services, and there's Google. No one else comes close to those big three. And Microsoft does have a unique way of approaching the cloud in that they believe in hybrid cloud solutions. Whereas the other two will tell you if you're not all in on the cloud and you don't have everything in the cloud, you're left behind. Microsoft say you place your services and your data where it's best for you. So that could be you want to run it on premise. It might be that you want to run it with a hosting company that's a partner of Microsoft, or you'd like to run it in Azure. Or maybe you'd like to run it on two or all three of those different types of clouds. And Microsoft makes that possible and offers solutions all the way through that entire stack, which nobody else does. Azure is absolutely humongous. It is cloud scale, which is, it's a very different thing to saying that it's data center scale. It's much, much bigger. Cloud scale is multiple data centers per region and lots of regions around the world. Each of those data centers is apparently the size of a football field, and as of last summer, in 2014, Microsoft said they had over 1 million physical hosts running Azure. One of the cool things about the Azure is that an SME, a small medium enterprise, can get into Azure and use the same services and the same functionality as a Fortune 100 or a government customer, but without some big massive investment, without some long-term contract. They can get in there for as little as $100 in open licensing, and they can consume what they want when they want it and stop using it without some 1 year or 3 year contract. Azure is an enterprise grade cloud, which means it offers management, automation, security and reliability that's backed by a service level agreement. Now, we can talk about Azure being huge, and it is truly huge. It gives you the ability to deploy something anywhere in the world. So you might be operating in Cork in Ireland or in Luxembourg, but there's nothing to stop you from deploying servers in Western US or in Japan. You can do it as easily as you could deploy it in North Europe, which is in Dublin, or West Europe, which funnily enough is east of Dublin, in Amsterdam. And you've access to all of this everywhere 24/7. Now, you might be a small, medium enterprise customer, or you could be a service provider for one of those SMEs. But don't get fooled into thinking that Azure is too big for you or for your customers. The reality is Azure is available there for everybody and at the same price. So you can get in there and deploy what you need just when you need it. Maybe you need a website. And that website might be free, or it might cost a few euros a month. You can do that in Azure with no other commitments. And you can scale that service out if you need to. So if your business has an opportunity to grow revenue, but to do that you need to scale out your service, you can do that. And you can do it for as long as you need it. You only pay for what you're using while you're using it. As soon as you shut it down, you stop paying for it. This means that we can change our approach to deploying IT infrastructure. Typically, IT is a blocker for doing business. If you go into a customer and they say, or a small medium enterprise managing director and say, hey, you know, we could do this, that and the other and it's going to generate revenue, but we're going to have to make an investment in IT, he's going to have to think long and hard about that. He's going to have to find cash for that. She's going to have to go to the bank and say, hey, I need to get a loan to fund this investment into IT, this capital expenditure. And that becomes a problem because cash is important to small medium enterprises. They typically don't have a lot of it lying around. And banks tend to be not very loose with their purse strings for these sorts of companies. When we use Azure, we're able to get in there without long-term commitments. We can deploy just a very small amount and we can scale it up. It's a lot cheaper to deploy than on-premise infrastructure. And businesses can jump at those opportunities that arise, that are unexpected. And they can do it without pricing from 3 different vendors and going through tender processes. They literally just deploy what they need when they need it and get access to enterprise-grade functionality that otherwise would be unaffordable. Things like load balancers or geo-content distribution. These are things that you go in and talk to as a managing director of an SME, they're going to say, sounds nice, but I can't afford that. In Azure, they can afford that. In fact, it might even be free. I like to explain the scalability and elasticity of Azure using a fictitious Bob the Butcher. Now, Bob is a wholesale butcher based in the Midlands of Ireland. And Bob has a traditional brick and mortar shop where he sells meat products. You know, your typical steaks and your pork chops and your lamb chops and sausages and bacon rashers and white pudding and black pudding and all that good stuff we like to eat here in Ireland. And then Bob has realised that he's missing out on something. He should have a website that advertises his business and his products. And you know what? Maybe down the road might even sell those products. So Bob reaches out, talks to a Microsoft partner. That partner hooks him up with a free website in Azure. Yeah, a free website. Same sort of thing that you might get from one of the traditional website hosting companies. The ability to upload content, do content distribution, and content management, custom domain names. That one's not available on the free website, but you get a good bit of stuff in the free website. It allows you to try out that presence and see what it's going to do for you. So Bob likes it. he's finding that people are finding out about his business through various different search engines. And he realizes that he needs to upgrade that site so he can start transacting business on that site. So he talks to his partner and they hook him up. They upgrade him for free to a paid for website. Now he starts generating money on this website and he doesn't want to have downtime. So the partner says, you know what, why don't I set you up with a load balanced website? So the partner, in 3 mouse clicks and pulling over a slider, expands Bob's business from running on one free website up to a paid for website and then to a load balanced website. Now Bob doesn't have to pay for some expensive load balancer that might cost 10,000 euros or 20,000 euros. No, he gets resilient load balancing for free simply by having a second instance of his website. Now, if Microsoft do patching or one of those websites crashes, Bob's business can continue carrying out transactions and he's had increased scalability as well. Now Bob is starting to sell stuff. He's shipping all around Ireland, maybe he's shipping to the UK and to Western Europe, and he's realized, you know what, this business of mine that's online is starting to outsell my brick and mortar business. I can't afford this thing to go offline. So if the Dublin data center, if North Europe region has an issue, I need to survive that. So the partner sets him up with a geo load balanced site by deploying another 2 instances in the West Europe region and using a simple process in Azure to geo load balance both of those deployments. So now Bob actually has 4 instances of his website running in 2 different regions. He can have it in failover or he can have it in load balanced, and basically it all operates very simply through DNS. And it's a micropayment cost. The more business he does, the more it will cost him. But it always is very, very cheap and affordable for this SME. Now Bob's doing well, but he wants to sell to the expats, those Irish folks who miss their fried breakfast in the morning, their sausages and their rashers and their pudding and all that stuff. He'd like to sell that stuff to the US, to Australia and to New Zealand, to Canada, but he's hitting a problem. Those people are browsing his site from the other side of the world, and they're finding that latency is making his website slow. And as we know, slow websites lose business. So he wants to improve the performance of his site. A few more mouse clicks by the partner, and now he has content distribution of all the static content of his site across all the Microsoft data centers around the world. And now his website performs brilliantly. When someone in San Francisco is browsing his site, they're actually accessing content from a local Microsoft region. When someone in Adelaide in Australia is browsing his site, again, they're accessing cached content from a local Microsoft region. Now, he's selling all around the world. But what if something changes? What if trade laws change? What if this doesn't work out and Bob needs to cut his investment straight away? Well, Bob can do that because he hasn't entered into some 1-year or 3-year contract and he hasn't spent any capital expenditure. Bob can shut down everything and go back to his free site or to nothing, and Bob doesn't have to spend another penny. And that is the beauty of Azure. That small medium enterprise is able to get in, start for free or for cheap, and grow and take advantage of enterprise type features that he wouldn't have been able to afford without Azure. And he can grow as his business grows, and he can shut it down without any long-term investment. So what can Azure do? Azure can do a lot. I like to explain Azure IaaS as being like a Windows Server in the cloud. Windows Server is more than just an operating system that runs on a server. It offers lots of roles and features that do things, and so does Azure. Now we can talk about all those things, but Microsoft, very cleverly when they launched Azure via open licensing, realized that they should talk about a few core scenarios. And I like to do that too. But I like to break them down into 2 types of solution. There's traditional hosting, where I want to put something up in a remote location, kind of almost like outsourcing. I can have virtual machines or websites that are run up in Azure completely independent of everything else. But Microsoft, as I said, has a unique selling point. They believe in hybrid solutions. They want to give you a choice. You can deploy stuff in Azure completely independently and remove everything on premise, or run it in conjunction with on-premise and with partner-hosted solutions. So that could be virtual machines. Maybe you want to span your Active Directory and other applications across your own on-premise site and Azure. Maybe you want to run websites in Azure that store data in your local databases. And you can access this stuff using site-to-site networking, such as a VPN or a WAN connection through partners like Colt, BT, or Telecity, who are express route partners. Azure Online Backup, I'll talk more about that. The ability to back up into Azure's cheap storage. We have Azure Site Recovery. Again, I'll talk about that later, where we can do a DR site as a service. Basically, it's a DR site in the cloud. Very affordable, particularly for the SME. And things like operational insights, which give you the ability to monitor and manage your servers that are running on-premise through a service in Azure. That's a typical hybrid solution that Microsoft is deploying. So, how does open licensing work with Azure? Is this going to be some nasty, complicated license that really confuses you, kind of like virtualization licensing might do, or maybe RDS licensing, or companion device licensing? Well, the news is really good. Azure licensing is probably the simplest licensing in the Microsoft space. But it's kind of like a prepaid mobile phone. In fact, it's very like a prepaid mobile phone. With burner phones, as they're called in America, you buy the phone, and that's your account, and then you buy credit. And you top up that credit on a regular basis. The idea is you might buy $100 worth of credit, activate it on your phone. And then anything you do on that phone consumes that credit, or as the Americans call it, burns that credit. So if I send a text to a designated family member, it might be free. If I send a text to someone else on a different network, there'll be a charge for that. If I make a phone call, there'll be another charge. If I make a phone call to someone in a different country, there'll be a higher charge. And Azure is like that. Every single thing you do has a price. It might be free, it might be a micropayment, it might be an hourly cost, it might be a monthly cost. But everything has a price. And when we price a solution, we try to estimate what those total prices will be. And it's actually not as difficult as you might expect. I'll try to do a video on that in a later point. The way we work with Azure through open licensing is we buy credits. Each credit is worth $100. Microsoft does their own exchange rate. That $100, when I activate it in an Azure portal, will be worth around €75.96 in the portal. That's what it was the last time I activated. Customers will purchase one or more of those credits. So they might buy one credit for $100, they might buy 10 credits for $1,000. And each of those purchases results in one OSA key. So if I buy 10 credits for $1,000, I'll get one online services activation key, which will appear in the Microsoft Volume Licensing Services site. I'll copy and paste that key into the Azure portal, and it will activate my credit. At that point, that $1,000 appears in my local currency, so it'll be roughly €750 by the time I activate it. At that point, I have 12 months to consume that credit, or it will expire. In other words, if I don't use it, I lose it. So our advice to anyone is, don't go out and buy a year's worth of credit, buy 3 months worth of credit. Or if you're just doing a proof of concept, buy 1 credit or 2 credits and see how it goes. So we also can configure alerts based on remaining credit on the account. So we need to know when we're running out of credit, because if you run out of credit, everything shuts down. Now Azure will keep everything for 120 days, so you have plenty of time to resume services. But we want to make sure stuff doesn't shut down. So we can set up these alerts. They're email alerts. Each one is set on a monetary amount. So we might set one at $100, another one at $75 or €75, or at £50 or whatever. And each one or each alert allows us to send 2 emails. Typically what we tell partners is, have one go to a mail list on the customer side, have another one go to a mail list on the partner side. And that way a number of people are aware of this issue and can start acting on it. Now if you do reach a certain point where there's not enough credit left to keep the business going, you can do an emergency top up using a credit card. The idea here is you put in enough credit using your credit card to keep the service running for a day or 2, and then you purchase the credits through your partner, who then in turn purchases credits through a distributor from Microsoft to top up that account. So here we have a scenario where a customer has purchased $500 worth of credit in Azure. And they've done that in January 2015. That $500 will last 12 months, or until they use it all. So if they don't use that $500 by the end of the year, it disappears. It doesn't exist anymore. However, if they use it before the end of the year, and they don't top up, their service will shut down. Now this customer or their partner set up email alerts, so they get the email alerts. And when they had $5 left, they topped up the account with $500. So in November 2015, they had $5 left, they purchased more credits, and they top up their existing credit with that $500. They now have $505 in total credit. The $5 from the original activation will be used first, and then Azure will automatically switch over to start using the other $500. The second $500 was purchased in November 2015, and it will last until November 2016. So that's 12 months for that credit. So plan your alerts, make sure you don't overspend, and make sure you top up at an appropriate point. You don't want to top up too early and then have the top up not expiring at the 12-month point. So let's talk about a few scenarios and solutions that you can deploy using Azure. One of the hybrid solutions, or on-ramp solutions, is online backup. The idea here is that backup is, it's difficult, it's painful. And we need backup to be resilient. I've been involved in a few situations recently where, customers have done backup, they've used good backup products, and they've had a situation where not only have they lost the host, but they've also lost the backup media. And that's been pretty useless to them. In fact, I know one where they basically have lost the business because they lost everything in terms of records and customer details and business transactions that were on their file servers. All gone. Because the host went, the storage went, and the backup storage went too. Tapes are unreliable, and disks are, they can have their own issues too. Now we know we're supposed to do offsite backup, but the problem is doing that with physical media can be expensive and can lead to human errors as well. Plenty of people might have a Windows Server Essential server or whatever will back up to a USB disk. It's nice, it's cheap, it's affordable, it's simple, but they never take that disk offsite. Or if they do, it's not encrypted, or it's not being done reliably, or it's not being brought back in. It's been left with a non-trusted person or someone who's on the cheapest wage and therefore can't be trusted. So there's all sorts of issues there, and that's where online backup came in. Now, online backup is not something new. There's plenty of providers out there. However, Azure, because of Microsoft's scalability, is able to offer the cheapest online backup out there, or at least one of the cheapest solutions around. Azure Online Backup in North Europe is costing 15 euro cent per gig, which when we started looking around the local market, we were finding it was about 60% cheaper than the best bulk rate that was available here in Ireland. So that makes Azure Online Backup really, really attractive, especially to small, medium businesses and to partners who are working in that space. So when we deploy this sort of solution, this online backup, we have two ways we can approach it. One is we can completely replace the on-premise backup. If we've got the bandwidth, this mightn't be a bad thing. So we could back up directly to Azure without using any local media at all. Alternatively, we could, say for example using Windows Server Essentials or the Essentials role, we could back up to a USB drive and use that for short-term retention, constantly overwriting it every day. And for off-site retention and long-term retention, we could have a second job that's backing up to Azure. So maybe we back up locally to disk at lunchtime and we back up to Azure at night. There's two solutions from Microsoft that are using this Azure Online Backup solution. And they're both called Azure Online Backup, which is kind of confusing, but I tried to call one Azure Online Backup and I refer to the other one as System Center Data Protection Manager. Azure Online Backup is where we take an agent from Azure and we deploy it onto Windows Server 64-bit edition 2008 or later, or Windows 7 64-bit edition or later, or a server running the Essentials role. We install that agent onto that server and we can configure a file and folders backup. Now we can't do system state and we can't do databases, but you can always back up a database to a file and back up that file. There is an asterisk on this. We can deploy this agent onto a host, a Hyper-V host, that's running Windows Server 2012 or 2 with the core install, in other words, no UI. And that supports the backup of virtual machines to Azure. Azure Online Backup is managed from the machine that it's backing up. There is no central console. However, there's been a lot of feedback on that, and Microsoft has said that a central console is planned. One of the cool things about Azure is it is in the cloud, which allows Microsoft to change it very, very quickly. And they take feedback very, very seriously. If there's a lot of feedback on something, they will act on it. This centralized management of Azure Online Backup has been a hot topic. The other solution you can do, and this kind of does give you centralized management, is that you can deploy a single agent onto a system-centered data protection manager server. So that DPM server can be doing local backup to some sort of cheap US or a cheap disk repository, be it storage spaces or a RAID 5 array. We use that for short-term retention. We install a single agent on that DPM server, and now we can start backing up SharePoint, Exchange, Hyper-V, files and folders, all that good stuff to the local disk, and taking a subset of all that, or all of that data, and sending it to Azure for long-term retention. We simply modify the existing protection groups within DPM. Now there's a lot of third-party solutions that also offer backup solutions and DR solutions based on Azure storage and services. Veeam, QNAP, CloudBerry Managed Backup, Commvault, and ArcServe are some of those that I found when I've just done some quick searches. Contact each of those. They all offer different kinds of solutions. Veeam seems to use a virtual machine appliance up in the cloud. CloudBerry Managed Backup gives you a central console for doing a resold backup solution. And Commvault and ArcServe use even cheaper storage in the cloud to do backup to Azure. There's a lot of questions we get about Azure Online Backup. These frequently asked questions typically start off with security. So Azure Online Backup encrypts everything using AES 256 before it leaves the server. The key for decrypting that data is never kept with Microsoft. Microsoft never sees that key. So they cannot decrypt your data in any circumstance. So you need to keep that key safe. Your customer needs to keep it safe. You should probably keep it safe for them as well. The data is compressed before it's sent to Azure. And after that first full backup, only incremental blocks go up to Azure. That first full backup might take some time. So a recent change Microsoft brought in was the ability to seed your backup using an encrypted disk that would then be couriered up to the Microsoft data center of your choice. We can keep up to 366 recovery points in the cloud, and we also get a complex aging and retention policy solution in Azure Online Backup. This is also a recent addition based on feedback. So we can keep daily backups, weekly backups, monthly backups, and yearly backups at different rates. We can keep quite a bit of data up there, so a single item can be 1.65 terabytes in size. We can have 25 of these vaults. This is the thing that we store backup data in. We can have 25 of those in a single Azure subscription, so a single customer can have 25 of those vaults, with 50 machines per vault, giving us over 1,200 machines in a single Azure subscription. Virtual machines is probably the most interesting of the solutions I'm going to talk about, because it's one of these, the only limited your imagination type of solutions. The idea here is we can run virtual machines in Azure. It's like having a remote Hyper-V site. In fact, that's exactly what it is. Azure virtual machines are Hyper-V virtual machines. They're completely compatible. So we can take the virtual hard disks, the HD files of our virtual machines running on Hyper-V, and we can actually upload them into Azure and run them there, making it a nice easy transfer process. Or the ability to even download our virtual machines from Azure and run them on a local Hyper-V site. Why would we decide to deploy virtual machines in Azure instead of on-premise in vSphere or Hyper-V? Well, it's CapEx. We don't have to spend on infrastructure. We have the ability to access a huge pool of resources with instant scalability, infinite scalability as far as we're concerned in the small medium enterprise space, and access services that just would be unaffordable, like load balancing and geo-content, caching and stuff like that, without mad investments that we just cannot afford in a SME. Some of the scenarios that I like to talk about include Windows Server 2003 end of life. So we know that's coming in July 14th, 2015. A lot of small medium enterprises are going to miss that date because they're going to say, I can't afford to replace physical servers that are running Windows Server 2003, I can't afford to replace the CALs and all that other stuff. Well, the good news is you can deploy virtual machines in Azure, you pay for them only while they're running. The cost of the virtual machine includes the Windows Server license, and you do not need CALs to access that license because it is a per processor license. So that makes replacing Windows Server 2003 much more affordable. Remember, it's an OpEx cost model. So you pay for the virtual machine by the hour. It's a monthly cost. It's just like electricity or water charges. It's not this whole, I need to spend 15 or 20,000 euros to get a new server or a new server infrastructure. There is none of that. It is a trickle payment. So it's much more affordable. You may have a scenario where a customer just wants to get rid of their servers. That's actually one I'm hearing quite a bit, where some managing director has said, you know what, I'm tired of being an accidental IT company. I never really wanted that room in the corner of the building, filled with servers and switches and all that stuff. I want rid of that. Sure, my IT staff are going to stick around. They're the guys who run things. They keep my applications working. But you know what? I don't need to manage and replace infrastructure every few years to have applications. I can run them much more affordably in the cloud and have my IT staff manage them from a web browser from anywhere. So maybe the IT staff even work from home. All they need is a web browser and internet access. Maybe you want temporary machines. Common scenario there is test and dev. There's a group of developers or testers who are working on something, and they fire up virtual machines on a frequent basis and shut them down, and they'll have a whole slew of those virtual machines. Do you want to spend on hosts and licensing and storage infrastructure for stuff that might run for 2 or 3 hours a week? Makes no sense. What if you only pay for it while you use it in Azure? Then you have a much more affordable solution. Microsoft partners need demo environments. They need to be able to show off solutions to their customers. Very often that means buying infrastructure, and that's when the owner of that partner company says, well, demo environment's not that important because it's going to cost a lot of money. Those partners typically do have free internal usage rights for Azure, be it through the MAP subscription or through a silver or gold competency in the Microsoft Partner Network. They can use those internal usage rights to build their own demo environments, which they pay for out of their internal usage rights on an hourly basis based on how often or how long those services are running. And we can build interesting hybrid solutions as well. So one of the ones I talk about is integrating with Office 365 using ADFS. This allows you to use your on-premise Active Directory for single sign-on and allows customers, or not customers, but end users who are working on-premise and roaming around the world to sign into Office 365 and Windows Intune and CRM Online, all these other Microsoft services, with the one username and password. When they're out in the airport in Benghazi or wherever, they can sign into Office 365 using their domain username and password, and Office 365 typically will pass on that to the Active Directory and say, hey, does this person actually exist, and are they who they say they are? Now, to do that with ADFS, typically people have deployed an ADFS cluster on-premise, and now their internet connection for their office becomes the issue. If that internet connection is dug up accidentally, those remote workers won't be able to sign into Office 365. So one of the solutions to that is to actually take that ADFS and deploy it in Azure, along with 1 or 2 domain controllers that are in the customer's on-premise Active Directory domain and replicating. So we've extended the computer room into Azure. And now when someone signs into Office 365 and a digger has torn up the headquarters office network connection, those people can still sign in because there's a copy of Active Directory and ADFS is running in the cloud. As I said, a virtual machine includes the operating system, but it can also include Microsoft or third-party software. So that makes acquiring software rather easy, to be quite honest. You can deploy a virtual machine that has Windows Server and SQL Server. The cost of that virtual machine includes the cost of Windows Server and SQL Server with no need for any CALs because it's per processor licensed. You might deploy a third-party appliance running network solutions, or you maybe want to deploy a Linux because somewhere between 20 and 30% of the virtual machines on Azure are running Linux. Or maybe you want to deploy a virtual machine that has Oracle pre-installed, and you pay for Oracle by the hour, which is a rather interesting way of acquiring enterprise software. A virtual machine is going to reside on some storage. The type of storage is called page blobs and disks. Again, we pay for that by the gig. That's an easy to predict cost. Now, a more difficult to predict cost of the storage is the number of transactions you're going to be running. But when you look at the cost of that, that's 2,000 of a euro per 100,000 transactions. If you go to the bother of trying to figure out what your transaction cost is going to be for your virtual machines, my bet is the cost of trying to figure out that cost will be more than the actual cost. So it's one of those don't sweat the details type of things. We get that with networking as well. Unless you're in a very network intensive business, you're not going to worry too much about egress data. When you're dealing with virtual machines, you do have to pay for data that's leaving Azure. So there's no ingress data cost. You don't have to pay for data going into Azure. You do have to pay for data leaving Azure. But you see that it's just over 2.5 cents per gig. Again, you're going to have to be transacting a lot of data to make that actually a cost that you're going to be worried about. And if you're doing site-to-site networking, you will need a gateway. So if you're doing site-to-site VPN or point-to-site or client-to-site VPN, or you're doing express route WAN connections through one of the express route partners, then you're going to have to deploy a fault-tolerant gateway that starts at about 21 euros per month. This diagram here gives you an idea of a solution where a customer is redeploying an old line of business application that was running on Windows Server 2003, and they're going to redeploy it as a hybrid solution on Windows Server 2012 or 2 in Azure. But they're going to take advantage of some of the features of Azure to modernize their application and to reduce the cost of it as well. So they don't just lift and ship, but they also do some re-engineering. So they can get rid of 2003 and deploy Windows Server 2012 or 2. They've got 3 tiers in their application. First off, there is the identity piece, and that's running on the domain controllers. They extend their Active Directory domain by deploying 2 domain controllers in the Azure Virtual Network in Azure. And these domain controllers are a member of the same domain that's running on-premise, and they're replicating the same way as they would across a site link. There's a pair of SQL Server 2012 or 2014 virtual machines. The SQL is pre-installed and part of the virtual machine cost, so that's made acquiring a new version of SQL nice and affordable. And there is a scaled out web presence. Now this is being very clever and keeping the cost down as low as possible. They want to have at least 2 web servers running. So those 2 web servers are going to be load balanced. And they're going to offer scalability and high availability. However, there are times when demand will grow and they'll need more web servers. Rather than running those web servers needlessly all of the time, this customer is taking advantage of something called auto-scaling. Auto-scaling in Azure will measure the overall processor utilization of that tier of the application, and when it reaches a certain threshold, after a few minutes, it will power up another virtual machine, and only at that point will that additional virtual machine start to be charged for. If the demand continues, another virtual machine will be added, and then another, until all 5 are powered up. And as demand subsides, the virtual machines are shut down, and the cost of those virtual machines is eliminated from the monthly charge. And this allows that customer to deploy all the scalability, but with a minimal amount of cost. Most SMEs understand that they need to have a DOR site, a disaster recovery site, in the event of some sort of issue that causes their building to be destroyed or their IT infrastructure to shut down. Here in Ireland, we talk about things like spring tides, or floods, or fire, or whatever. We've all heard about hurricanes and earthquakes internationally that cause all sorts of issues. We tend not to have those things here locally in Ireland. It's a very moderate climate. But all around the world, SMEs deal with the reality that a disaster can strike. There's all sorts of statistics out there that are questioned and debated about the survivability of a business after a disaster. But I mentioned earlier on how I dealt with one particular site where, they did have a disaster. They had a fire, and they lost everything. And they had a local backup, but that was it. They had a local backup, and it was lost. Then they could have had an offsite backup, and to restore that and get their business back up and running, they could have done it, but it would have taken time. A DR site allows you to restore the business in minutes. In fact, if you even know the disaster is coming, such as a flood, you can even avoid downtime or significant downtime and any data loss. But most SMEs, although they know they need to have a DR site, they don't have one because it's unaffordable. They need to spend a lot on capital expenditure and operational expenditure. If you go to a customer and say, hey, your on-premise infrastructure is going to cost you 15,000 euros and a DR site infrastructure is going to cost you 12,000 euros, they're going to say, well, you know that 12,000 euros, I can't afford that. And then, even if they could, they're going to need somewhere to run it. And that's where the operational expenditure comes in, where they may have to pay to use, the partners' facilities or a hosting company's facilities and pay rent and electricity and networking charges to get that up and running. So DR sites don't happen very often in the SME space. Microsoft have seen this and they've evolved their Azure Site Recovery Services, or ASR, to offer a virtual DR site in the cloud, which is built on top of Hyper-V Replica, and that allows us to replicate Hyper-V virtual machines into Azure. Now, rather interestingly, this is also going to support vSphere at some point in the future. That was announced at TechEd Europe 2014. And to make this more interesting to the SME, this is an OpEx only solution, and it is a predictable cost. So ASR gives us a virtual DR site in the cloud, or DR as a service. It is an OpEx only solution. It's based on two charges. It's a per virtual machine charge, that's a fixed cost per month, and a storage cost. If you do invoke that DR site, the virtual machines will be deployed, and then you are charged for virtual machine running costs. We can replicate these virtual machines into Azure without any additional software. There is no third-party solution required because it is based on Hyper-V Replica, which is a built-in asynchronous replication solution in the Hyper-V host. There's no extra licensing for that. We can also automate the entire failover process of our applications using something called a one-click failover. We define or engineer the failover process, and that can be starting up virtual machines in the right order, running scripts, running manual tasks that are prompted for, and we have to confirm that they're completed. And we can do this in three types of failover. We can do a test failover, so we can actually test end-to-end the business continuity plan, including bringing up all the services without impacting production workloads in the customer site. We do that on an isolated network in Azure. We can do a planned failover with zero data loss. And we can do an unplanned failover with a minimal amount of data loss depending on how we've configured the asynchronous replication. In any of those situations, the customer is going to be delighted to know that they can get up their business in the worst, most unexpected kind of disaster with as little as 30 seconds of data loss. Now, you do have to do a bit of research when you're planning a deployment into Azure. It's not one of these simple, let's sell storage in the cloud type solutions. I've heard that line quite a bit, and it kind of angers me a little because it shows that someone doesn't really understand what they're talking about. You can't just say, let's put all our business data onto a USB disk, dig a hole that's 8 foot deep, throw the USB disk in the hole, and cover it up with concrete. Because you have to think about how are people going to access that data and use that data and use it to actually generate business and carry out the operations of that business on a day-to-day basis. It's pretty pointless if you can't get at that data. Same with services. You can't just say, let's just throw that in the cloud and hope for the best. You've got to think about why these services exist and how people are going to use them. Now, when we move something into Azure, we have the ability to link and extend into it. We can use site-to-site VPN, we can use client-to-site VPN, and we can use WAN connections over an MPLS network using ExpressRoute via a number of ISP partners that Microsoft are working with around the world. But we've got to think about where we've moved this to, or where we've moved this stuff to. We've taken our data, we've taken our services, and we've put them on the other end of a latent network connection. So we can't expect that legacy solutions are going to work very well. Now, web-based applications are going to work really well because web-based applications were designed for the internet, which is a latent network. So if we lift and shift something that has a web front end, it's going to do pretty well in Azure. But you can't say, hey, let's take our file server or our archive server and just stick it in the cloud and hope for the best. because people are going to be uploading and downloading files and their performance is going to suck. So we need to start thinking about how we're going to minimize the impact of that latency. This comes back to doing things that we've been doing for a long time. We're just doing them in a different way. So maybe we put in network optimization appliances. A number of those brands actually have virtual machines that you can deploy in Azure on an hourly cost basis. You'll also have to deploy their equivalent of physical appliance on the customer side. You could look at deploying something like Branch Cache, which is in Windows 7, Windows 8, and 8.1 Enterprise. It allows you to optimize data caching on the customer site for web and file services data servers. You could deploy the client applications in remote desktop services or Citrix in virtual machines running in Azure. So instead of Microsoft Office running on the end user's PC, why doesn't Microsoft Office run in RDS or Citrix in Azure, right beside the back-end application or the data? Or more cleverly, why don't you deploy Remote App, which is Microsoft's Remote Desktop Services as a service? So we can upload our applications into Azure and present them to end users over RDS without having to deploy all the complicated infrastructure and licensing of RDS. And that's a per user cost per month, with a capped cost as well based on utilization. So there's a lot to Azure, but the reality is you just cannot ignore it. Office 365 has proven this. We've seen locally in Ireland, Office 365 pretty much replace Exchange and on-premise SharePoint deployments. People adopted and embraced Office 365, and the first businesses to do that were the small medium enterprises. They value IT being low cost and available and scalable and modern. They like the fact that they can collaborate and work remotely. They like the fact that it makes business much more flexible. And the ability of small medium enterprises to embrace this stuff is superior to that of the large enterprises and governments that you might think would jump on Azure and IaaS before the small medium enterprises. No, the SME is going to do it first. Now we're seeing SMEs going to their partners and saying, we want to do X in Azure. And they are driving that demand. And many of those partners are trying to play catch up because they haven't attended training, they haven't kept themselves up to date. Traditional training just won't prepare those technical staff and those salespeople. Now those salespeople can catch up pretty quickly on aka.ms/AzureVAR. There's a lot of material up there for Microsoft partners who are operating in a sales or account manager role. Technical people need to attend training. Now you can get a lot of stuff on Microsoft Virtual Academy. It's a great resource for keeping up to date. There's a lot of blogs out there, but you know, that's what I do. I spend about 2 or 3 hours a day reading those blogs and keeping up to date on the amount of change that's in Azure. And there's a lot of change in Azure. There's 2 or 3 significant announcements a week. This isn't like Windows Server, where change happened every 2 or 3 years. This is happening very frequently. So that's where we, as value-added distributors in Micro Warehouse, offer our services to Microsoft partners in Ireland and in Northern Ireland. We create a lot of training. We have ramp-up training, get people up to skill. We have monthly briefings on what's new and doing a deep dive on particular features. And we're bringing that regionally across Ireland and Northern Ireland in the coming months, along with our existing Office 365 training. So don't ignore Azure. If you want to ignore Azure, well, you can do it, but it's not going to be good for your career or your business. So thank you for tuning in. My name is Aidan Finn. You can learn more about Micro Warehouse and our products on www.mwh.ie. And you can learn more about our training on our Micro Warehouse Learn site on mwh-learn.azurewebsites.net. Thank you.